Welcome to Forecast Lab, the channel without the hype, and where we are not afraid to talk about the technical stuff. Great to have you all back here once again. You can see we've got a stormy pattern in the Gulf Coast region. And since we focus on the technical side, we should start with the top-down view. This is called the forecast funnel, where we focus on the larger scales of space and time. In other words, we look at the synoptic and global picture, and then we focus down on the details. But I'll try not to make this too boring. Let's start out and check out that system there in the south-central U.S., low-pressure area in southeastern Oklahoma, and a large area of thunderstorms from northern Arkansas all the way down to the coast off Corpus Christi. Behind that, cold air filtering into the back of the system. On the east coast, we've got a large high-pressure area, rather mild, stagnating polar high temperatures in the 40s and 50s, but you get down into this area, Virginia, North Carolina, it's up in the 70s. And then looking out to the west, another incursion of cold air coming out of Canada, temperatures behind that also kind of mild, looking at 20s and 30s, but some gusty winds. So that's going to be a classic Alberta clipper sweeping to the southeast. Returning down to the south-central U.S., we can see some evidence of an upper-level low over the Childress, Paducah, Lubbock area. That's indicated by the thickness contours closing off right there. And the upper-level flow indicated likewise. It tends to very closely follow the thickness patterns, so we would expect to find that jet running about like that, directly over the low, probably a jet max back here in Texas, and the divergent left front quadrant would be right out there. Well, I guess we'll break that forecast funnel and just take a quick look at the small-scale details. Some isolated storms along the Mississippi-Alabama border. We get into more numerous storms in Louisiana, and then way down here southeast of Lake Charles, looks like there's a tornado warning in effect. That's going to be radar indicated. We'll take a closer look at things on AWIPS. This is the same system used by Weather Service forecasters. And there it is. It looks somewhat disorganized. The more interesting isolated intense cells are out here in Mississippi, but not much going on with them right now. So where are these coming from? Let's add on the pressure overlay. This is going to be from the high-resolution rapid refresh, showing a low-pressure area right there near Shreveport, the cold front likely right here in this trough. And then we've got kind of a stationary front going all the way up into Arkansas. So this is going to be out in the tropical sector. We can add on the station plots to see what's going on. Don't know how many of you are familiar with reading these, but the important thing, let me just zoom down a little bit. The number in the bottom left, that's going to be the dew point temperature, and that's an indication of the moisture. 68 to 70, that's going to be very juicy, very sultry air. 66 right there in central Louisiana. So this area here, very rich with moisture, and probably the highest dew points I'm seeing right there, 71 degrees. We can also see that there's a flow out of the south, so the low-level jet is probably in place there, and we've got a gradient coming in from the south, bringing that moist air off the Gulf. We'll look at the precipitable water a little bit later to show how far south that moisture goes. Temperatures likewise up in the mid-70s across Mississippi. They've got a little break in the overcast. You can see almost 80 degrees right there at Jacksonville and Shreveport, up to 81 degrees at this hour. If we add on the potential temperature overlay, we see some interesting stuff right there in Texas. The red lines are packed close together, indicating a gradient. That's going to be the cold front. So that's running from just west of Shreveport down to about between Houston and Galveston, and then right there off the coast. So this is all tropical air. We can see another gradient right there along the coast, but that probably delineates the cooler Gulf air from the air that's been heated over the land. So if you want to put it all together, there's the low, there's the cold front, the stationary front to the north. We've got the isolated storms out here, and then the clusters of multicellular complexes out through this region. and the cold air advection sweeping back in to the west. A quick look at other areas of the country, starting with the northeastern U.S. We've got northwesterly flow once again, high pressure over the State College area of Pennsylvania, and that front we talked about right there in Virginia, dividing 70s from the 50s and 40s up to the north. Earlier this week, we had a hurricane strength low off of Cape Cod. And here's a neat loop. This is going to be false color infrared imagery from University of Wisconsin Sims, wrapping around hurricane force winds right there in the center. And when we roll that forward a second time, by the way, this is going to be back on Monday evening. Those turquoise plots, that's going to be the 1.5 PVU height, which is basically roughly how high the tropopause is. So that's that stratosphere descending to low levels. Earlier this morning, some very spectacular gravity waves all the way from Pennsylvania up to Maine. If we roll the animation, you can see how they don't really move. They're kind of locked in there to the terrain. Looks like we had kind of a glitch there in the imagery, but you can see that as we get the heating, we kind of dry out a little bit, and then that field of clouds kind of shrinks there into New Hampshire and Vermont, and just a little bit of gravity wave activity left out around Mount Washington up into Quebec. The rest of the northeastern U.S. looking pretty nice this afternoon, but trouble coming in from the southwest. That's going to bring a major change going into tomorrow. The southeastern states under the effect of southeasterly flow coming in from the area just north of Dominica and Cuba. However, warm temperatures ahead of this next system, as we mentioned, 80 showing up all the way into Alabama, and the moisture return is quite strong there onto the coast. By the way, if you're in the Mobile area, they're supposed to be holding a online Skywarn class tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. Check the Weather Service site in Mobile, Alabama for details on that. And since that is an online class, quite possibly anybody in the U.S. can check that out. In the south-central U.S., we've got this lethargic cold front. It's February. Those fronts should be on the move, but we've been contending with this front for maybe 2 days now. It's just kind of creeping around there. Shreveport up to 81 degrees, as we mentioned, 79 degrees at El Dorado, Arkansas, and those dew points up into the upper 60s and low 70s. The satellite imagery, very neat to see. Remember, we were talking about that upper level low around Childress, Paducah, Lubbock. We can see some indication of that with that cumulus field there. That's going to be some weak cold core convection developing. If we had a little bit more instability and moisture back there, we could get some low-topped supercells, but not today. We've also got the dry slot working in through the backside, clearing things out in the Texas Hill Country, and then the warm conveyor belt, the moisture, and the front located back in here. And some of that precip acting kind of like a anafront with precipitation fields all the way from northeast Texas into Oklahoma. And you can see there on the water vapor imagery that dry slot moving into central and eastern Texas. Strong subsidence back here where we have that warm shading. The moisture is going to be right out ahead in this area here. This is mostly responsive, this satellite product, it's mostly responsive to the mid-levels of the atmosphere. It's kind of hard for it to detect stuff in the low levels. However, this gives us a good indication of roughly what the precipitable water is, and so we know that out here it is likely quite dry. And we can throw on the station plots. I don't know if you can read these, but we're seeing 20s dew points right here. Yeah, pretty much all of this is 20s. We pick up some teens up there. And 40s out in this region, cold air advection, modification of the air mass, and then, of course, the moisture air located out in this region. So, yeah, let's see here, 36-degree dew point, 32. That's around Uvalde. 43, 43, and that's right there in that subsident area. And further north, they've had plenty of rainfall, especially in the mountains of southeastern Oklahoma, western Arkansas, some amounts up there near 3 to 4 inches. So with that very saturated ground, flash flooding is definitely a concern. Heading up into the northern plains, we've got this new Alberta Clipper dropping southeast. You can see a field of wind back behind there, gusts up to 38 knots in central Montana, 20s elsewhere, but those winds will increase as they spill out onto the plains. And for Thursday, we're going to see that wind field behind the front really start to expand. There's the forecast of wind gusts possibly up to 50, maybe close to 60 miles an hour, especially in eastern Wyoming, Nebraska, the eastern Dakotas, and eastern Colorado. And in certain isolated spots, that could raise some dust because the fields are plowed over, there's no vegetation, and so there's going to be a lot of loose dust that can be picked up quite easily. Further east across the Corn Belt, we're going to see that low-pressure area lifting to the northeast, spreading rain and showers and some bands of snow into that region. That's going to occur tonight into tomorrow. And you can see going into tonight and tomorrow that rain will be spreading into the Midwest region. Some isolated reports of 2 to 3 inches possible, and of course more down there along the central Gulf Coast. And then by tomorrow night into Friday, it rapidly moves up into southeastern Canada, and along the tail end of that front, some more rain and showers possible down there in the southeastern U.S. The southwestern states looking quite nice, 65 at Phoenix, 58 at Las Vegas, with a little bit of northeasterly flow, so a little bit of residual high pressure there in the Great Basin area. But there's that reinforcing shot of cold air moving into the Salt Lake City area, the eastern Idaho region. That's a look at the big picture there. You can see those massive amounts of snow on the ground in the Sierra Nevadas, but overall, fair skies. No real problems either in the northwestern U.S., some clearing in the interior regions, but out to the west, there's another weather system lurking offshore. That's it on the surface chart. Ridge through the Portland and Washington area, but then we pick up the southerly gradient offshore, so a little bit of this warm front energy will be grazing Vancouver Island, Seattle, and the mountains just to the west and north of Seattle. There's a few images from this morning. That's the sunrise at Brundage Mountain Resort. There's another vista there in Idaho. You can see that orange hitting the backside of the ski lift towers. That's another look at the sun rising there. I'm guessing that that's the sun off in the distance. And this is going to be Washington. That's Crystal Mountain, basking in the clouds, enjoying a nice sunrise. And there are a few snow showers there in northeastern Utah, northwestern Colorado, and I did see that they're looking for some enhanced avalanche potential in the mountains of Utah there. Any slope steeper than 30 degrees could see avalanche activity. Heading up north, not much going on in Canada. Some lee-side troughing, little baroclinic system there around Grand Prairie. Then going up into Alaska, they finished off the 13th warmest January on record. Most of that was in the eastern North Slope area, the southeastern part of the state. And for tomorrow, we're looking at a very strong low entering the Bering Sea area, but that's kind of out of our forecast range. Going into Canada itself, not much going on, the usual minus 20s, minus 30s. The coldest temperature, that's going to be minus 38 right up there, northern Baffin Island. And going back down south, some unsettled weather off the coast of Labrador. Temperatures rather mild, about 10 to 20 degrees above zero. And then out here, that's going to be the zero line extending across much of northern Quebec. But that's quite a bit warmer than what they saw last week. And down there in Ontario, that's a look at the North York Observatory in Ontario. Standard weather instrument enclosures there. And that's a look at an enclosure that I had when I was in my late teens. I actually built this enclosure with my grandfather. Not exactly high budget construction, but we did it, and you cannot get those enclosures for under several $100s back in those days. You can see a swing psychrometer right there, maximum minimum thermometer, and then some other thermometer that I had in there. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at the forecast products. This is going to be the sea level pressure and 500 millibar or 1,000 through 500 millibar thickness. So low pressure area there, that's going to be this evening, 0Z, and the cold front extending to the south. Warm front, maybe a little further north than I had it on that analysis chart. The cold core low right there around Wichita Falls. And then that second system up there in Wyoming. Cold front about like that. And connecting back in maybe to this system somehow, maybe something like that. All right, and then we have that other warm front offshore. And the rest of it running about like that. So that's the setup for this evening. So you're going to see this low right here moving to the northeast. And there it goes. That's the overnight hours into tomorrow morning, approaching Chicago with some heavy rain spreading up into Illinois and Indiana. And that'll move rapidly into the Great Lakes and into Ontario and Quebec. And the tail end of the front will be draped across Georgia. And that definitely does not have a history of moving very fast. So I'm not too sure that's going to get all the way into Florida. There is a push of 1035 millibar high, maybe as high as 1048 across Colorado. That'll keep that northerly push into Texas and Arkansas. We pick up another wave to the southwest for Friday. So we're going to be looking at that on our weather program on Friday, right there in Georgia. Maybe a little bit of thunderstorm potential with that. Cold air advection continues on the backside. And then we see cyclogenesis out there in the northwestern high plains. 1004 millibar low up there in Alberta. So that's going to paint out kind of a lee side trough like that. Further to the southwest, a little bit of baroclinicity right there. Some sort of frontal system right there. Upper level low off of Oregon. And maybe a little bit of moist advection into California and Nevada. And that is going to produce maybe some precipitation mostly in the mountains, maybe about 1 to 2 inches in those areas. Then we take that forward into the weekend. Looks dry across much of the central U.S. Some rain with that stagnant boundary down there just hanging on around the Jacksonville, Charleston, Apalachicola area. And gradually moves on off up the coast as a coastal low Sunday into Monday. There it goes. But that'll push on off out to sea, so minimal effects right there in the northeastern U.S. Some other system developing there in Mexico, coming together in Texas for Tuesday. And that'll be our next system, maybe some more severe weather potential coming up for Tuesday afternoon. Here's another system coming out of the Pacific right there, dropping southeast. You can see that really coming together as we get into Wednesday evening. Maybe some thunderstorm potential, or at least maybe a dry line, maybe some blowing dust for Wednesday. I don't know if the moisture is going to be in place for that. And then we see kind of a cata front coming out into Texas for Thursday. Warm front lifting up into the Great Lakes area, some strong cold air advection on the backside, and that 540 line running about like that. So some of this probably will be snow out there in Minnesota. And then going into next weekend, 17th and 18th, strong system in Ontario and Quebec. Could be a secondary low out there in New York, but that's pretty far out, so we're not going to worry too much about that. Lots of high pressure across the central U.S., and then just kind of a cool, dry pattern for the middle of February. I feel kind of cursed because I always want to get into these other charts like this one, but there's so much to cover, there's so many areas to talk about, so it is really a challenge. But this is the chart we're looking at for this morning. We'll bring that up to the current time, and we can see a pretty strong wave out there, bringing a area of falling heights and positive vorticity advection in northeast Texas and eastern Oklahoma. So that energy is going to work up into Missouri and into Illinois overnight. That's going to be closely correlated with jet stream position. Let me draw that out. The jet running about like this, jet max about in here, and the divergent left front quadrant right in that region. The right front quadrant right there tends to be convergent aloft, so you tend to get subsidence there. Same thing back in this region. And then we have the divergent right rear quadrant right there, but not much going on. That's going to be an area of cold air advection, so that will cancel that out to some extent. But that whole mess will move up to the north, and you can see another wave dropping back in across New Mexico and down into Texas, but there's not going to be much moisture for that to work with. So what that's probably going to amount to is going to be cold core convection, kind of shallow, maybe a lot of virga, not a whole lot of it reaching the surface. At least that's my initial guess. But any of this that comes into contact with the deeper tropical air could develop thunderstorms, and that could be what we're seeing here for Saturday. Another wave coming into the western U.S. There it is. That'll cross the Rockies and into Texas, and that will give us another shot of showers and storms going into Tuesday and Wednesday. Looks like a very similar progression there. And another wave coming in from the Pacific, and that'll move more into the central U.S. for late in the week. Here's one more bonus chart up at 850 millibars, about 5,000 feet. This is showing the 850 millibar height, the temperature in red, and the shading, that's going to be the advection. So bringing that up from this morning to the current time, you can see that system coming together, the cold air advection back behind that cold front. We paint out the 850 millibar fronts, looking about like that, and then we've got that little area of an occlusion in Oklahoma. And then we can see that moving up there into Illinois, warm air advection out ahead of it, the cold air filling back in behind it, and that all moves up into Ontario and Quebec. Then system number 2, not much in the way of advection fields with that, but that's going to be it. Low pressure at 850 over Alabama for early Saturday. A little bit of a frontal zone right there across Florida. So this is going to be about midday on Saturday. So the triple point located around Savannah, down the coast around Daytona Beach, and then the cold air coming back in behind, maybe with the dry slot. So those are some things you can look at on the charts for Saturday. But yeah, more weather coming in from the west, one system after another. Things just don't slow down. There's so much to look at. And I'll just run this forward in case you want to look at different areas. There's the system for midweek next week. Very similar to what we have tonight. And then a more northerly system for late in the week next week. So those are going to be your fronts. And that'll affect Iowa, Minnesota, Illinois. Depending on how the moisture is, there could be some severe weather potential out ahead of that system. And then, of course, wintry weather back behind it. Okay, we've been recording since 3 p.m. and now it's 5 p.m. The time really flies by, so it's time to check back in once again on Mississippi before we render and upload this. Some severe thunderstorm warnings coming out for southeastern Louisiana and northeastern Louisiana. Fortunately, no tornado warnings, anything like that, just this other one down there east of Lake Charles. But at this time, we're looking pretty good. A look at the high-resolution rapid refresh, which gives us some idea of the character of these storms, does show kind of a disorganized MCS. I don't see anything that looks like a strong supercell, so that's good news. There could, be some isolated potential in there, here and there, but overall, I don't see any huge problems overnight, and then it just looks a little bit more forced as we get up to 4 to 5 a.m. But definitely keep on top of those watches and warnings, because things could change rather quickly. And that's all I got for this edition of Forecast Lab. Thanks to Angel Suarez and Alexander Williams for being our newest Patreon supporters. Thank you very much for that. And I'll leave you all with some footage around the San Antonio area from Sunday. So enjoy. We'll see you back here again on Friday for another edition of Forecast Lab. Take care, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.